Before I start this show, let me ask y'all two questions. Can games that did really well like Zelda and Final Fantasy, since now they decided to change their formula to an open world, go back to the tradition style, or is it too late? And on the second question, would you like these games to continue on like that from here on out? Let's begin. And welcome to the show. I am Jeremy Evans, aka your in-game boss, aka your retro activist. And welcome to the very first episode of the show where we be talking about gaming. But the goal of this show is really to challenge you and challenge ourselves with the questions and challenges going on in the gaming universe. Either it is from past, future, or present. And with me is my mini boss, aka the Masters. But what you need to know also about him is he does a podcast show called Cinematropolis, and that's a very popular show. I'll let him talk about that for a moment. But Mr. Caleb, the Masters, welcome to the show, bud.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Jeremy. It's a pleasure to be here and to be considered a mini boss. Yes.
Right. I don't know. I think mini bosses are actually sometimes cooler than the main boss. Sometimes.
I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, Dark Link from Ocarina of Time. I remember that guy way more than whatever that water blob thing I thought at the end was. Right.
I
mean, come on.
And then also too, like, you know, recently you're playing God of War. I'm pretty sure there's some pretty cool little mini bosses in there you have to go through, or challenges.
Yes, there are a lot of mini bosses. I don't know if any stick out specifically because there's like, it's more like the thing that stands out. There's like one boss that you fight multiple times, and that sounds lame, but in the context of the game, it actually works super well because it's part of an ongoing story without spoiling it. But yeah, it's pretty good. There's some good boss fights, some epic scale things.
But not just Caleb, but we will also be having other different people come on the show as a mini boss. So, you know, Caleb is one of the mini boss. That's his title right there, the Master. And, you know, I'll be rotating either like Richard Taplin or even other mystery guests that'll be coming through. So I can't wait to present them to you. But for this, before we even start the show, I want to talk about just a couple of games that you've been gaming, just in general, just to kind of get people to know what kind of games you're interested in. So God of War you're playing right now came out.
Yeah, it came out like a week ago, and I think, the day after it came out last Saturday, that was the only thing I did that whole day.
And for the listeners, by the time you hear this episode, which is premiering in May, this game's probably been out for like a couple of weeks already. So
right. It's great. I don't want to spoil it. It's very story driven, and the thing about it is, like, Kratos is never... The original God of War games are good games. And I would honestly argue, mechanically speaking, they're great games. But the character of Kratos I always found to be kind of bland. He just kind of seemed like something left over from the 90s, a little bit juvenile, like this guy hellbent on vengeance and goes through and kills the entire Greek pantheon. I mean, it's a lot of fun, but like, there's not much...
Simple, right? I'm here, revenge, kill everything.
There's not really much to him, right? And so this new one does a really interesting thing by making him a father, and it's a father-son story, and you see Kratos having to come to terms with his past because he doesn't want to pass on his rage and vengeance to his son. So he's trying to figure out how to work with the kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of be at peace with himself, and pass on the things about his past that he does like versus his more violent tendencies. So it's very,
sounds like he's trying to find himself, but at the same time lead his son into the next,
right. It's kind of like one of those like father-son. He's like raising his son. His son doesn't know who he is or anything like that. And then he's kind of haunted again by his past, and that's where he has to figure out how to deal with how he communicates that to his son. Does he tell him? Does he not tell him? Like, how does that work? Anyway, don't want to spoil too much, but it's been a really great game. It's all done. As a film nerd, it was really cool. One thing to do, the whole game is one continuous take, which is something I don't believe has ever been done in a video game before.
No.
It's actually relatively rare in films to do that. I mean, you have like one take is where there's no editing. There's no cross-cutting, like you cut, smash, and splice things together. So something like a movie like Slacker or what's another more popular movie? But there's very few movies that are ever done all in one take. Usually you have what are called long takes where you get like 20 or 30-minute shots. Children of Men did this really well, or Gravity's another one. Birdman is a movie I think was all... created the illusion of being done in one take, where there's no cuts in the camera. This is something that they did in God of War, and it's pays off in spades because you feel like your connection with Kratos is so much more intimate. In the moment, there's just a lot of moments where you get really great close-ups without having to feel like it's too. Feels just more raw, I guess.
Do you think it's interesting that the creator, when he came up with this idea a long time ago, he mentioned that they were against the idea. Then he left. Then they brought him back to do this, and now it's paid off. Don't you think it's kind of interesting that they didn't want to do it at first? They didn't think that was good, and now they did it, and it's like phenomenal. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, so I think you're if I'm correctly referring to. I'm gonna look up his name real quick. It's Corey Boggs, I want to say.
Let me see here.
Trying to make sure I get his name right. Director.
Let's try this right here.
Corey Barlog. That was
yeah.
it. Yeah, I think you're referring to Corey Barlog, who, he made. I think he was over God of War 2 was his main. That was where he really made a name for himself in that God of War franchise, and then he left and came back, and I think he had a son or daughter. He had a child in between since then. I think that's where he drew a lot of his inspiration, and thought, hey, what if we did that with Kratos? I think that's it. And honestly, God of War 1 through 3 were big mega hits. And you had the PSP games that I think were probably sold fine and connected with the audience. But they had that prequel that came out. I think it was
Sessions, I believe.
Is it Chains of Olympus? Am I thinking? No, I'm thinking of the PSP game.
Sessions. That was like the prequel before all that. Yeah, it was the last PS3 game.
Okay, yeah, it wasn't very good. Oh, Ascension, that was it.
Ascension, sorry.
Yeah. Okay, God of War Ascension, that was it. And it wasn't very good. Because at that point, they'd already... the story wasn't great because it was a prequel, and prequels can be good, but they didn't do it in a particularly interesting way because we already know how all that's going to pay off. It didn't really add, and I don't really feel like I felt like Kratos' story, the beginning, middle, and end, was already complete with the original trilogy, and I don't feel like the prequel really added much more depth to that story. He had already basically killed the entire Greek pantheon, or at least the pantheon people cared about. So it was nice for them to say, well, we can't really keep doing the same thing with this character. We're going to run him into the ground. So let's take a break, step back, and what's a totally fresh thing we can do? Well, actually, let's make Kratos less driven by rage. Let's make his motivation a little different. He's trying to raise and protect his son. Let's set it within the Norse pantheon. Like, I think that's super fascinating and super cool. And it seems like Sony Santa Monica, especially after that prequel, which I don't think sold poorly, but it just didn't connect with audiences in the same way the original trilogy did, made a really great move in bringing Corey Barlog back and allowing him to really just take a lot of chances. Again, the one shot, the long take, the whole game being played in one shot is unheard of. That's a huge risk, especially for a game that cost that much money. And I'm sure it was a nightmare in development to figure out how to make that work.
So, does the Viking fits that world for you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, it's a soft reboot. So the game, which is steeped in the Greek mythology, just places Kratos in a different setting. But this is a different Kratos, so it doesn't feel like we're placing the same Kratos in a different world.
Okay.
The Kratos we have here feels like because he's been living in the wilderness. He had a wife and has a son. This is a different guy. I mean, it's the same character, but he's just a totally different character. He's just totally different at this point. So it feels a lot more in line with what you'd see in the Norse mythology.
And now we also see this with Sony is, I think, since back with Uncharted and now going into this, there's been a lot of games from them with partnerships. We've seen this from The Last of Us.
Right.
So is this probably the best? Now, I don't know if have you played Last of Us?
Oh, of course, yeah.
Do you think God of War beats that on the bonding compared to Last of Us? Just the bonding, the chemistry.
I haven't finished God of War yet, so I don't want to make a strong statement. I would say right now, specifically on the relationship, I do like Ellie and
Joel.
Okay. I connected with them. Their circumstances are a lot different. They're not blood relation, which I'm a big sucker for surrogate families, like people who aren't related, but they just kind of grow to be like family sort of thing. Like I'm a real sucker for that personally. So I think that works a little better for me. It's not that God of War doesn't work. In fact, I think it's pretty fantastic. And I think it's because it's a different type of relationship. It's not a father-daughter. It's a father-son. It's actually a blood relative, someone he's seen since he was a baby, versus Joel and Ellie, where Ellie shows up as a teenager with Joel. The dynamics are a little different. I would say what resonated with me is probably Last of Us, but I still haven't finished God of War yet. So.
Okay. And my last question before we move on to what game I've been playing is, should this one be one and done and God of War should go to another era, or should we continue this voyage with the father and son? Now, I know you still haven't beat the game, so you probably don't have a quite answer yet, but do you feel like this feels like this is a good story? I think we need to move on to the next chapter, not go back to this world again and leave this a special moment.
Well, I haven't, as you said, I haven't finished it yet, but I feel like there's plenty that could still be mined from Norse mythology. It feels very much like, I'm sure it's going to feel sad. I don't feel like it's going to end on a cliffhanger, because it seems like there's a pretty clear arc for where it's going, even though I don't know how it's going to resolve it all. I feel like there is a pretty clear trajectory for this game where it could stand alone, and maybe they could move to a different pantheon. But I'll say this. I also feel like after playing the game for at least a good solid 25 hours, I feel like we've just barely scratched the surface of Norse mythology. Okay.
Because I feel like there's two directions I would like to see God of War. One is, if Kratos continues to be the main character going forward, I would like that kid in each entry to get older and older.
Right.
Or have it where Kratos is soon going to drift away and the son takes the reign and continues this God of War saga. Those are like two directions I would love to see what they do.
That seems like a pretty organic way to go. Yeah, I think so. And again, we'll see what happens at the end of the game. I don't even know if Kratos could die, for all I know. I don't know. That's not a spoiler. I literally have no clue. But, we'll see. I think that's a very organic... I think you could do one of those time lapses where we take a break and we come back to that character 5 years later. But I still think, again, I'm not an expert on Norse mythology, but I can tell you, man... there's just so much that's like so many stones unturned.
It's a savage world,
right? There's just so many stones unturned with that mythology. So many things they haven't tapped into that I know are there. That I'm like, okay, there's definitely enough for us to do more Norse stuff in future games.
Game I've been playing and I'm almost wrapping it up. I'm on the moon. Is Super Mario Odyssey.
Oh boy!
And I know that game came out like a little bit. But
it's a huge game.
I know.
There's so many moon pieces.
Right. But like literally, that's a fantastic game. I love it. I've been putting a lot of hours into it. Barely scratch the surface. I'm about to beat it, but not beating on the collective side. Just almost beating it just story wise.
So how many moons do you have?
I'm at 400 something.
Okay, that's good, because I actually never met my goal there on that game. I did beat the game, but there's a couple of secret worlds you unlock with the moons post game, and there's like one last one I still haven't done yet. I think you have to get over like around 500 moons, and I'm close, but I just it's one of those I keep distracted by other things. So I'll hop on, play for like 10 or 15 minutes, grab a couple moons, and then take a break.
I learned from Mario games is like when I get put into a world, I try to do the most I can out of it before hopping in. So later on, I don't have to go back and like, I forgot this and this. I just have to remember. I just have to gather a couple of things. All right, I got this.
That's a good strategy. And I try to do that, but then after I get bored with that world, I'm like, I'll come back late. I got enough.
It's not for everybody.
Yeah,
it's not for everybody. I guess I get that trait from collectathons.
Right.
If back in the 64 era, where you have to collect mostly everything to get to somewhere. So I'm just used to like, let me just get everything before I open that door. I do not want to hear that saying you don't have enough to get in.
Right.
I want to be like, I'm a badass. Open the door. you know what I mean?
Look at my moons.
Right.
Every freaking color.
Right. But where I would rank it, man, I don't know. I don't know where I would rank it yet.
It's a tough one to rank in the pantheon, man. There's so many good Mario games.
Like Mario World's still number one, and I think no one's gonna take that shine from it, regardless. But it's Mario Odyssey might be number 2 or Galaxy number 2. It's one or the other.
I've been thinking about that for a while myself. I don't know if it quite, and I'm not saying it's a fantastic, amazing game, and I actually really appreciate that it went more back to a little more of a Mario 64 style, big tribute to Mario 64. Love that. But I don't think I never was quite in awe as much as I was when I played Mario Galaxy and Mario Galaxy 2 with some of those galaxies. Although that said, there are some amazing moments in Mario Odyssey, especially New Donk City. Oh man, it's wild.
I do say this. I think the challenging in Galaxy is higher than Odyssey.
Yes.
Because the boss fights were way more challenging, and I'm also saying on top of that because gravity was also your challenge against the boss, so I guess that was a little bit more of a challenge. But I think in Odyssey, though, I think that Bowser could have pushed more of his old school minions into this game instead of like the bunnies. Bunnies are cool.
Yeah.
But they kept repeating them.
Rabbits.
Yeah, we're rabbits. Yeah, but they kept coming back and forth, and it'd be cool to like bring these iconic old school villains back, even from the 64 era or something like that. Like I like the King Babam guy. I like all these other villains. It'd be kind of cool. Even like underwater levels, like it'd be cool to see a boss fight underwater or something like that. But that's just probably me being picky.
No. I don't. I think I agree. Well, you fight those same guys a couple times, and you fight Bowser. It's pretty similar pattern every time you fight them. It would have been nice to get a little more variety. And I will say, there's something about Mario Odyssey structure that's awesome, but also I just don't think I like it as much as there's this 1 star you go get at the end of this level, and I like that quite a bit personally. Mario Odyssey, it's like, hey, you walk, it's like a grocery store, and you don't really have you got to pick out so many items there, but you don't really know where you're going to find what you're looking for. You know what I mean? Like, it's versus Galaxy and 64, where it's like, hey, we've got one goal, and your whole mission is to accomplish said goal, get that star. This one, it's like, oh, then there's a moon over here, and there's a moon over here.
It's an Easter egg hunt.
Yeah, there you go.
Basically, it's basically, find these stuff, look for clues, go for it.
Right.
And there are some challenging ones.
Sure.
And so I had to use some amiibo help, scan those things, and they helped me some hints. So, but let's get into some news before we hit the main topic. Is speaking of Super Mario Odyssey hit 10 million sales.
Crazy.
Yeah. And it makes me bear the question is, what is the highest selling Mario game of all time right now? And so I have a top 10 list. Now, we have a list of, past 50, but we're not doing that. We're going to do the top 10.
Right.
And so weighing in number 10 was Super Mario Galaxy at 12.72 million. So Mario Odyssey is actually, if I had to look on this list, it would be ranked probably number 17
as of today.
But
remember that the Switch is only like just over a year old,
and that's amazing.
Yeah,
that's the fact that it already hit that, and it's already like almost up there, passing on this list apparently Mario Kart 64 at 9 million. And so, but Mario Galaxy is number 10 with 12.72 million. Mario Kart 7 was at 14.82 million. Super Mario Brothers 3 is 17.28 million, and that's, of course, those old school games to keep getting imported over. Yeah. So that's good. Super Mario Land beat that on the Game Boy.
I'm interested because I want to say, was Super Mario Land a pack-in with the Game Boy?
You could be right. I thought it was that or Tetris. It had to be one or the other.
It was one of those two, I think. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I also wonder if this is counting those digital sales numbers too, because Super Mario Brothers has been. I've bought Super Mario Brothers the original,
right, and that's why it's number 1. We'll get to that. No, it makes sense. But still, Super Mario World was 20.61. Then number 5 is Mario Kart DS, 23.60. And then New Super Mario Brothers for the Wii is 29.90. And then New Super Mario Brothers, I guess I'm thinking that's the one on the
I think that's
DS.
I think it's on the original DS.
Yeah, I think that's at 30.8 million, which is funny because these are 2 games that don't get poured over, and they still did pretty well.
Those new Super Mario Brothers games sell like hotcakes, man. People love them, and I like them, but I don't connect with them as much as some folks do.
And then Mario Kart Wii is at 36.83 million, and then Super Mario Brothers the original is at 40.24 million, which is not surprising because you mentioned that game just gets poured over, and I'm pretty sure when the virtual console comes out for the Switch, it'll probably go even higher.
Oh yeah.
And so, but one thing is surprisingly though is Mario Kart 8 is nowhere to be found on the top 10 yet. I'm hoping it'll go up there. Mario Kart 8 really needs to be up there on that list.
I wonder, because it's sold. It's sold. What didn't they announce? It sold almost 10. How many? Because in the same press release about
it sold more than it did on the Wii U. We know that,
right?
I thought it sold, like you said, about 10 because it's right now it's weighing.
Because it's outselling Mario. Because it's selling Mario. It outsold Mario. Or sorry, it outsold The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild, which is sitting just shy of 10 million.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I wonder if these numbers maybe the numbers haven't been added in yet. I don't know.
Now let's get for granted they didn't officially say the date of these.
Oh sure.
Yeah. So like even Mario Odyssey's not even on this list. This could have been back at like a year ago.
Oh okay. Gotcha.
And so don't quote me like it's now. I'm just kind of giving an idea for people like, hey, these are the top.
These are the top selling.
Yeah.
Mario
So
games.
By the end of the year, this whole thing can just change in a second. It's just kind of curiosity.
Right.
And
Come on, fandom, update your wiki page.
Right. But a new president has been announced because if you remember Tatsumi Kimisha, or I pronounced his name probably wrong. He was a replacement for Ottawa.
Iwata.
Sorry, Iwata. And he announced that Kashima is going to be retiring in June. And so now a new president is now taking the reign, and his name is Shintaro Furukawa.
I'd say Furukawa. Furukawa.
And so he's the next one up. But what? I don't even know who this guy. He came out of nowhere, right? Like you would think you would hear some highlight names. Like you would think the guy that does the Nintendo Direct, like, maybe he will be president soon or something like that. But he's not him,
right?
And so,
well, I mean, picking a CEO, just I'm kind of working at a bigger company now as part of my day job. Like I've learned how these decisions get made. And I'm sure I know his age was a factor. They wanted someone who's a little younger. And I think he's like he's in his 40s, right?
He's 46 apparently.
Which for someone to be named CEO at 46 is not that old. So he's got many years ahead of him. And also on top of that, it's looked like he is a guy who has a lot of experience in a lot of different areas of the business. I know that's something that a lot of companies look for when their CEOs, like how much do you know about different aspects of the business, right? So I know that's a factor in.
He looks like a guy, based on when we talk about a little about him, is he's a guy that actually was well hidden in the company and just worked his way up behind the shadows.
Right.
So basically, he joined Nintendo in April in 1994, and where he's working in an accounting office in Germany for a decade. So that's something I just did not see that coming.
Right.
I thought it'd be somebody like. Honestly, I thought it would be somebody more. I don't want to say in-house because that's still part of it, but I thought it'd be someone who's like strictly in Japan,
right? Nintendo Japan, yeah.
And so by mid 2010, he rose up to the corporate office, working for global marketing and the executive department, and then on the outside director of the partly owned Pokemon company.
Yeah, he's on the board, and he sits on the board for the Pokemon company still to this day, I believe.
Yeah, and is really interesting. But he is fluent in English, and he was involved in the department of the Nintendo Switch, and so that's even more interesting that he knows the Switch very well. He's not out of fish out of water, knowing what's going on and all this stuff. So he helped with the production of that. He's fluent in English, so he mentioned that he is going to try to be more in the public eye, so we'll probably see him in more of those directs. And so
I'm sure they're looking for someone to be the face of those the company, because this thing about Kimi, I'm gonna get it right, Kimishima. Okay, that's the thing about Kimishima-san is he was never going to be the long-term guy. It was when Iwata passed away that they named him acting president. But I think the plan was always to find someone else who could run the business.
I think he even mentioned that. You're right.
And it's really interesting because he became the president in a very successful time for Nintendo. The launch of the Nintendo Switch. They also, on top of that, the launch of the Switch, Nintendo's also been licensing a lot of the properties like they've been trying to do for years and years. Talking about getting a Nintendo theme park, getting a Mario movie in development, like things like that.
You think he's the one that pushed for the iOS on the phones too? You think?
I'm sure that was a part of it. Yeah, I think there was I'm thinking there was a lot of different things that were always kind of in the oven, or the conversations that were happening within the company when Iwata passed away. That he's put into action. That Kimishima-san has put into action.
So there's two quotes he said, since now he's becoming president. He said, we will develop the company to its fullest. And his other quote is, I will balance Nintendo's tradition, originality, and flexibility. So let's go by that second quote. I will balance Nintendo tradition, originality, and flexibility. What do you get from that? Just out of your curiosity.
Well, at this point, we're looking at people at Nintendo who haven't been around since the NES days. This is someone who probably is a big fan of was a big fan of Nintendo before he started working for them. So I think he's probably got a lot of nostalgia. So I think he has a pretty for the old games. So he has a really good understanding of the brand, the things that work about those games, but also the tradition of Nintendo. I think he's going to have all of that in his pocket, but he also is going to bring youthful energy and new ideas to the table that I think are going to be a little more in touch. Because that's the one thing about Nintendo that's always been equally, it's their strength and also their weakness is the fact that they always seem kind of out of touch. Now, on one hand, they do stuff, and we get Mario Odyssey and Breath of the Wild, and you're like, whoa, just because they're so original and live in their own space. But there are other times when you're like, guys, why aren't you doing XYZ? This would make you so much money if you just did XYZ. Take our money. Take, we want to love you, and like they just don't do it, and they don't communicate, or they don't communicate it well.
They get the one giant step, but it always feels like 2 steps back still. It's like you're almost there.
Well, even the virtual console is a great example of like, dude, that thing is the day it launched, they're gonna make so much money. Like, so I hope whenever they launch it, I hope it's something really interesting and really cool. Like, I still think a Netflix style virtual console at this point would be wonderful. But that's the thing, like, they just don't give it to us, so they don't communicate what the plan is. Like, the Nintendo they make a lot of very frustrating decisions. And it feels like it oftentimes feels like they're out of touch. I think getting someone younger as the CEO is someone who's a little more in touch with the role of technology. I mean, it took them, how long did it take them to make a smartphone game?
It felt like 5 minutes, but Well,
I mean, it took forever.
Not in a bad way. Not in a bad way.
It took them forever to get, the iOS has been out for years, and then finally they're like, oh, I guess we should probably make a game. And I know.
And then when they did it, it's so quick how they did it, right?
And they used it as part of their marketing strategy to sell Mario, to build hype and buzz for Mario Odyssey. So it took them a while to wrap their head around that concept, something that other companies have been doing for years. So that's like one example. There are a lot of different examples of Nintendo doing things like, dude, you guys are kind of out of touch. The fact that back in the GameCube days, they thought the internet, online gaming was a fad. Right? You know what I mean? So I think getting someone who's a little more younger, who's probably a little more experienced with technology that people use on a day-to-day, and understanding the needs of younger people, younger gamers, people in their 20s and 30s and 40s, I think is going to be a huge win for the company.
It makes me question about when he says originality and flexibility are we going to see a lot of some games being revived back and being changed up in a different way? So like, will we see a Kid Icarus game again if the world still wants one? Or we have Metroid Prime 4 coming back, but does that mean we're not going to see Metroid for another long time ago, a long ways away? Or are we going to see a lot of these games come back in a new way? You know what I mean?
Right.
And then the Pokemon thing is, are we going to see a new way of playing Pokemon on the Switch?
I think the promise, and I don't want to misquote anything, the expectation out there right now that I feel like it's been communicated is that the next Pokemon game that's going to be on the Switch is going to be something a lot fresher.
Okay.
So we'll see. I don't know what that means exactly, but the expectation is for like a kind of a big RPG. Which is what all Pokemon games are, but I think people are thinking something a little more like you'll actually see the Pokemon in the wild sort of thing.
I'm actually excited if he can be that one to open the door of brand new franchises, because Nintendo is good at sticking with their source, and they make buku money, no lie.
Right.
They make those gold coins, but are we going to see more of just brand new titles that they're going to try to push a tradition? I'm not saying they don't do that. They do sometimes, but they're very well hidden. They're like little mini games just to see it out. But we're going to see new icons.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Splatoon's a great example of a new IP that they came up with on the Wii U that's just had lots of life and has a hardcore fan base. And I love the Splatoon guys. I'm super excited to see them in Smash Brothers. No, I think it's a great point. That's been a complaint I've had about Nintendo, and feedback for them is, hey, give us more new franchises. But I will say, they're doing that. They just look a little different. Like ARMS is a new franchise that's working out for them now. It's not what I had envisioned for a new franchise. But hey, there's a fan base there. I think Splatoon's a great example. But I say keep developing the new IPs. I felt like the N64 and GameCube eras were ripe with all sorts of new IPs that they just kind of came out of nowhere. That I feel like we haven't seen that in a while. So yeah, I mean, more new IPs will be good. I think you're going to see a balance, though.
Okay.
I just hope we move away from the whole Wii Fit, like super family friendly image thing. The Nintendo Labo. That's the kind of thing I'm like, you know what? That's the thing. It's not necessarily for me, but I dig that it's out there. But it's not like it doesn't feel like white bread, like all that a Wii Fit.
Well, it doesn't feel like you're required to use them in normal games. It's not like you're playing Mario like, use the Lambo. It's like, it's not like that. It's like, look, if you're a fan of that, go over there. If you're not, don't worry about it.
Right. Well, that's an example of them, investing in like some new IP that way too. So,
and then from there, and hopefully we'll see on his first direct to see how he does. because you know how the world is. It's all about first impressions sometimes when he does his first direct.
Well, fortunately for Nintendo, they do Nintendo Direct, so it's very produced, so they can kind of control that a little more than if he was doing like a keynote presentation.
Well, I guess like that makes me wonder, like, is he going to be open of working with more Western people to come with new ideas to help influence games instead of like, we're going to do Zelda our way, that's it. You know what I mean? Like, are they going to take some input from, Nintendo America putting the input? It's like, America's kind of, gaming now is kind of going this way. How about we try open doors and try a new idea like this? Or they're going to just like, we'll do it our way.
Right.
And so, but beyond that, they also mentioned one thing that is a very surprising, well, not surprising, but surprising. Nintendo 3DS is going to go beyond 2019 and further. So, like, the question is, do everybody still want that 3DS to keep going, or is it kind of time for it to, close it and we just focus on the Switch now, since that is the new taken on the go product?
Nintendo does this with every generation where they're like, no, we're totally going to support that old thing that old device, but they always throw the crappiest titles at it. I mean, yes, technically there will be support. I do think the majority of their powerhouse resources and development teams are going to be focusing on the Switch. I personally am of the mind right now, and I know this is not necessarily the best for their business because they want to be able to sell multiple devices to SKUs. They want to be able to have those dual platforms to make money off of both of them. But I'm of the mind, personally, I want everything on the Switch. You know how frustrating it was for me to play Metroid, The Return of Samus on my 3DS? I'm like, dude, this would be great if it was on my Switch. And now I love my 3DS. It was great. It's got honestly, I would say, had one of the best gaming libraries of any Nintendo console, hands down. But man, I just want everything on the Switch.
Right.
I want it. It's a bigger screen. It's still portable. I can take it with me anywhere. The battery life's just as solid. I mean, I'm all about the Switch. So bring it on.
I think that it's funny because I feel the same way. They're going to be putting crappy games, but I also think they're going to put those games where like people miss just to see if it works out on the 3DS, and if it does work well, then they'll probably put it on the Switch. So I think the Return of Samus was what helped push the Prime forward to go up there.
And I think them communicating that is not for us, not for the hardcore gamers. I think it's for like the mainstream people who just buy the 3DS for Pokemon games, or like the people who are very casual because there are people who aren't going to get a Switch for a while, and they want to be content knowing that there's going to be more games coming for their 3DS.
I just hope they don't do the whole, and I'm not saying it was a bad idea. Apparently it did well enough, but at the same time, I really don't want that. Let's do the Smash Brother treatment. Let's put them on both again. I'm like, nah, just dedicate it to the Switch.
Yeah, I don't think the Smash Brothers is going to be on the 3DS again. I think it's going to be on the Switch.
Dedicate it to the Switch and let's just move on.
By the way, I love Smash Brothers on the 3DS. I was so happy about that. Honestly, I probably put more hours into that than I did on the Wii version. I like the Wii version better, of course, but like, dude, I took that 3DS. I played the crap out of that thing on my 3DS. I was glad it was there. But see, now we've got the Switch, which is a marriage of the two.
Right.
I've got the pretty graphics, the powerhouse, the better controls. And I've got the portability.
Right. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to get into our main topic about games changing their formula, and do we accept it or not? We'll be right back. Hi, and thank you for listening to the podcast as part of the In-Game Boss program, a network of gaming and other variety podcasts, gaming podcast shows like the In-Game Boss, Gaming Halls of Rivalries, and of course, the Gamerstand podcast. Other variety podcasts, we have Bond Never Dies, Come Meet, and Be Mindful of Jeremy Evans. And if you have any other questions, please email us at ingameoffice@gmail.com. And thank you so much. And welcome to the second half of the show. I'm your host, Jeremy Evans, a.k.a. your retro activist, with my mini boss, the master, Caleb Masters. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, man. It's great to be back, as always.
Right? So, Zelda has been announced as the best-selling game of all time at 12.74 million copies as we speak. But what was the best one before that? Do you have a guess?
The best-selling Zelda game?
Before Breath of the Wild.
I want to say Ocarina of Time or the original Legend of Zelda. Maybe Link to the Past.
We have Twilight Princess at 8.
I should have known that.
Is at 8.85 million, and then Ocarina of Time follows by 7.6.
Because it had two platforms, and it sold really well on both, and it launched the Nintendo Wii.
And so why do you think that it sold so well? Is it because it was the newest Zelda out and people are all over the Switch? Is it the new formula? Or, what do you think it is that made Zelda such the best-selling game, Breath of the Wild? What do you think it is?
Well, there's a few different things. So one, you already mentioned one of them. So the last best-selling Zelda game was Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. It launched the Nintendo Wii, and also was on the GameCube, and hey, it was the best-selling Zelda for a long time. So they duplicated it here. They said, hey, man, they promised it for the Wii U, and I'm sure when they were in development, like for the longest time, they never planned this to be like a Switch game, but you know how it goes. It just took longer, and it's a huge game, so it took longer than they expected. And then I'm sure the conversations behind the scenes were like, hey, this game's taking us longer than we think. The Wii U is not doing gangbusters. In fact, you know what I mean? I'm sure there was a point where they're like, oh, this is not selling well. This is not working. And in which case, they take a look at, we got this new console coming out. Is this a match? Can we is it too... Would it take us too long to make this on the Switch and launch it on the Switch? So that's number one. Is it launched a console, a new console that everyone was excited about? Again, the Wii U there wasn't really a lot of fanfare around that launch. People that had a hard time wrapping their head around the concept for it. The Switch, like the Wii in a lot of ways, they sold the concept so well. Hey, you can play this thing anywhere. You can just drop it on this little dock and it's on the TV, just like the Nintendo Wii. It's like the idea of being able to play with your friends and wave it around and actually do a sword fight. They sold the concept. So the Switch has got a lot of hype going into it. Oh, we're going to launch out the gate with the Zelda game you've been waiting for, what, I think it was 6 years? Yeah, 6 years for this game.
We had a lot of HD... polished games from Wind Waker and all this stuff while we're waiting for the next big thing to come along.
Right. They almost re-released.
Oh yeah, and they had the 3DS ones.
Right.
Yeah.
They had two. They had almost released all of the 3D Zeldas in HD or remastered. I guess in the case of the 3DS. By the time we finally got the new one, which I was not upset about, by the way. More excuses to replay those great games. But yeah, so there was the hype. I do think I personally really liked Skyward Sword. It's got some problems, sure, the controls. I don't know when they worked, they were amazing, but that is not a beloved Zelda game. No. And it also didn't sell very well because it came out after the Wii U had kind of fallen off. People had already moved on. So it didn't sell super well. So it felt, for a lot of people, I'm sure, it felt like, man, I haven't gotten a good Zelda fix since Twilight Princess. So I think... You've got all those different factors in there. And then, of course, it actually is fresh, because that was another thing, a criticism that's been lobbed at the franchise, and I think somewhat reasonably so, was all these 3D Zeldas, and even Zeldas in general, were starting to get a little more formulaic. And this one was all about breaking the conventions, and they talked about... Aonuma had talked about how he was trying to rethink the conventions of Zelda throughout the development and how to break the mold, and then they actually did it, and it worked amazing. So they made an amazing game that launched alongside a new console. The reviews were out the roof. It was just a perfect storm.
So let's go back to the formula part you mentioned. They changed the formula up, and it's more of an open world game, but on top of that, is getting that formula as a lot of games of I want to do it my way kind of style. Like Zelda is, you have your objective, but you do it the way you want it. Do you want to start fighting this first? You want to go do this first? You can do this first. It's basically your playground. You play whatever the way you want it. And we've seen that in a lot of games, from Elder Scrolls to Fallout to all this stuff. So now Zelda kind of gets is doing a little take on that in its own way,
right?
And we're seeing that also too with Final Fantasy 15 is a game where you're kind of doing it your way, except like the main linear, but like there's all a bunch of other stuff you can do your way, how you do it and everything like that. So I think that's one of the big perks that made Zelda the best selling, because you're going to a game not only blind, but you're doing it the way you want to, and you're not being forced to, I need you to go this way, I need you to go this way, I need you to go this way. And kind of, do you agree or disagree?
Agree or disagree with the fact that it broke the mold?
You broke the mold. Do you feel like that's the reason why it got even like bigger sales, is because people going in, this is probably their first Zelda, and it's easy to get into. It's easy to get to into the game because it's puts you right in the game. There's not a huge epic story. You don't have to do these 1, 2, 3 steps before they let you go their hand and let you do whatever. Do you think that's one of the big traits?
Yeah, no, huge strength of it because you mentioned it. Like there wasn't it breaks the formula and it just kind of drops you and lets you go. And the thing about, again, the Zelda formula is there's always that opening scenario. And it seemed like they got longer and longer with each one. Because with Ocarina of Time, it's like, hey, you got to do all the quirky forest stuff. And then you got to go to the tree. With Majora's Mask, you got to do Clock Town. Now, although Majora's Mask, I think it actually works. The opening scenario works exceptionally well with that world and story. But I mean, Wind Waker, you've got Outset Island, you've got all that stuff. There's always, and then of course, Skyward Sword notoriously had the worst like opening tutorial section. Felt like 5 hours to get through, and that was a problem because it just makes it. Even though those things are designed to make it more air quotes make it more accessible, I don't think it actually did. I think it was actually a big turnoff because people get bored. Versus Breath of the Wild, where it just drops you in, and it teaches you by giving you the tools to do things your own way, and that little opening area, which I think is pretty brilliant because you get a good feel for how the mechanics work because you do them, and it just gives you very basic directions.
So let's go ahead and answer the 2 questions that I mentioned at the beginning of this show, and that is, can a game that did really well like Zelda, Final Fantasy, and other games that are also taking this treatment of, let me give you this open world, you do it your way, can they go back to the traditional style, or is that too late? Can Zelda, is it too late for Zelda to go back? Like, can the next game be accepted going back to the traditional style, or is it more like we have to stick with this style now and move further? To me I think they can go back to the traditional way, just kind of cut out the fat. Let's not take away from how long it takes for us to get to the game. Like, just throw us in the game, but just kind of give us the direction you want us to go, but still have fun doing it. I think they can do that. I just think they do too many steps just to get to where we need to go. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so, like, for instance, for Ocarina of Time, like, you have to do all this just to get out of this forest, and it's more of like, look, we need you to get here to here. You can keep the path going, but just cut the so much dialogue, I guess that's the word, because Zelda had a lot of dialogue, and like, I need you to go do this side thing before you go do this.
Well, the dialogues, I actually, one of my criticisms, it's not really criticism, one of the things I miss from I was missing in Breath of the Wild from the older games was the story wasn't quite there. I know Legend of Zelda games, I think, even though they all follow a similar template, all have very unique stories they're telling, and I didn't miss that a little bit here. The story of Breath of the Wild is phenomenal. Like the premise is phenomenal. Oh God, it's like this is post-apocalyptic, man. Like Ganon already. I mean, they stopped him, but like the world basically was destroyed. Like this is 100 years after the world Hyrule was basically wiped out. That's a really, really fascinating premise, and I think that it would have been the game could have used from more story beats. Now, obviously, whenever they shifted to the more open world type of game, they had to figure out how do we give this game a story without abandoning, while also allowing players to kind of do whatever they want.
Right. That's why they have you go find the story yourself instead of showing it to you. And
it felt a little like what they did was smart. With the going and recovering the memories, and then obviously you had cutscenes at very big pivotal moments at the beginning and the end of the game. But and then every time you entered a dungeon area, you got some cutscenes. But I also felt like there could have been a little more through line. It kind of felt a little just disconnected, all of it. Now that's not to say I didn't like what was there. I just think it could have used a little bit more. But that's one thing I'd like to see them do moving forward. To kind of answer your question, I don't think they can go back. But I think what they can do is look at, hey, what are the elements from the old games that we can work it back into this new infrastructure we've created, this new style of game we've created? How do we take those elements? So the story was one thing that I was missing. The dungeons in this game were very cool, but I kind of missed the themed dungeons we used to.
And that's the thing, though. Yeah. Like I like the dungeon things a lot more than these bunch of little challenges, which they're cool. After like the first 50, and it's like, okay, I get the point here. But I liked to be in this. I would have loved it to find these dungeons on my own and then go on this long journey in this dungeon. Yeah, so I mean, I love the shrines. I think that was actually a brilliant addition to the game. But my thing about it is,
I really think that the dungeons they had were they were like shaped like animals, and which is kind of clever. But when you got inside of them, they were all very. When you get inside of them, they were all very samey, right? Like they looked aesthetically the same. They all had a slightly different mechanic for how to solve the puzzle. I like the theme dungeons. I like the fire dungeon. I like the spirit temples. I like those. Like when you walk into a very clear aesthetic, and the puzzles oftentimes fit into that sort of theme and aesthetic of each dungeon. I miss that. And that's something I think they could very easily incorporate back into this new style of game they've created. And also the boss fights. I did not love the boss fights in Breath of the Wild.
There was no iconic boss fights. No, there wasn't. It was basically clones of Ganon,
right,
but in a different way. And that's why I was thinking, like, they could go back and do the traditional thing, but, like, send it to a castle, but let us beat the castle in our own way to get to that boss instead of, you got to do this step 1, step 2, step 3. Like, bring me to this castle. Show me there's a million different options for me to get to this boss and beat it. And I think that would be kind of cool when you're going back to kind of a traditional way,
I do think the structure of go into this dungeon, fight a mini boss, get a cool item, use cool item to kill the boss, I think that's over. I don't think they're going back to that. I do like that, but I don't see, with the more sandbox way, having more choices.
Yeah.
Having more, how having more of those choices fits in with that. You use this one item to kill this boss. I think that's done, and I don't.
Well, see, that's why I was saying, like, in that castle, there's no, like, a certain item that you have to defeat. I'm just saying, go in that castle and just, if you don't have this item, here's another option. It might be harder, but you can do this option this way, or you can go find that item and then use that to make the boss easier. And that way, you're kind of doing it your way. You do it the hard way, you do it the easy way.
Sure.
That's what I would kind of like to see. That way, you're not, upset at certain parts of that game, like, dang, I wish I could just see if I can do it with just a sword. I know people at the beginning of this game went to go try to fight Ganon right in the spot.
Yeah, and you could. It's pretty brilliant, actually.
Yeah. And so I would like to see, if they decide to go back traditional, is go back to, we can go through these castles again, but make it where we can kind of do our own way at the same time.
Right. Yeah. No, I think instead of us going back and trying to fit the new things they learned from Breath of the Wild into that old infrastructure, I think what you're going to see instead is, how can we take the things we like about the old infrastructure and work that into the new style that we've created. I think there's been a lot of games that have done this recently. You mentioned Mario Odyssey actually is another one where it used to be, hey, you go into this world, you get the star at the end now, and then you go back out of the world and you go back in. It's a different mission. Now it's just like, hey, there are moons everywhere. It all changes. It's more sandboxy.
But that's I guess that's the only thing that's different. It's just it's an Easter egg hunt, but you still get that formula of, I'm hopping different worlds each time and doing everything I can before going to the next world.
Right.
And I feel like we still get that formula from 64 to Galaxy. You're on this world until you finish everything you want, and then you move on to the next thing.
Sure.
And so I guess that's the way I still look at it. And I don't know if we're ever going to get a Mario where here. And I actually mentioned a long time ago of, how about you just give us this whole world, and if Mario can see it, just go there. And then if you go to that's that world you go to.
Right.
And so I could see that in the future, maybe, but I think they like the structure of, Mario's levels. So let's give him levels. So here's this world. Go to this world, do everything you can. Let's move on to the next thing.
Right.
And so far, I haven't got burned out by it. But at the same time, we don't get a lot of solo Mario games that much anymore.
And they give you a lot of different way. They keep it fresh though.
That's true.
And yes, it's been the same way with the different levels on these Mario games, but I don't feel like there's been one Mario game that's exactly like the last one, unless you count Galaxy and Galaxy 2, but I really look at those as one package anyway.
Right. And then, like, on top of that, Final Fantasy 15, I don't know if you ever touched that, is, you still have a linear story, but it's not like until the second half when you really want to push story, but they do have you open this door, and you can basically do whatever you want instead of and it's more of an active turn based. So, well, not active turn based, it's basically hack and slash now. And they're breaking that style of the turn base into this now. And then you can see this from like Ghost Recon, the newest entry, where they broke that mold of, now it's not tactical, it's more of, here's your squad, do whatever you want. Wildlands, that's what it's called, Wildlands. And you do it that way. And, it just differs back and forth, right? And so, but you have games like Rayman, Castlevania, Sonic, and Metroid, and God of War that are now changing that formula. And, just like a couple of those franchises, sometimes they work and they go back and forth. Something that doesn't work and they're like, let's just go back to this. And so do you see Zelda maybe doing that in the future? Do you think you would see them going back and forth doing like that? Or you think this is what we're doing?
Zelda has done that a little bit because on the handhelds generally they've been doing more of the classic 2D style Zelda like we saw.
I guess like the main entries, I guess.
Well, and I would say
they're all main entries per se. I'm guessing the console editions.
the home console. Mm-hmm. Yeah, on the home console, then the answer is no. I don't think we're going to go back. I don't think we're going to go back to an Ocarina of Time or a Twilight Princess style game. I think we're going to see them taking what worked about those games and applying it to the new structure they've built.
Okay, so let me ask you this: Metroid, for example, it went first person and it went back 2D. Why do you think they decided that? Still change that up? How come the Prime series just doesn't continue on with the first person with their next entries regardless?
Well,
what I mean?
They've actually stayed pretty consistent with the Metroid franchise, with the exception of Other M, which was experimental and kind of a big misstep. Because again, a 2D Zelda is different than a 3D Zelda. A 2D Metroid is a lot different than a Prime Metroid. So, and there are fans of both of those things. Mm-hmm. So on the 3DS, they finally gave us another 2D Metroid with the Return of Samus, and there were a lot of fans. That's exactly what they wanted. They like the Prime games, but they also want a 2D game.
Okay,
like you would see with Super Metroid. Metroid Prime, I'm interested to see because we haven't seen any footage from 4. We don't know what that's going to look like at all. And I'm very interested to see how that turns out because I am a die-hard in the wound. I love the Metroid Prime trilogy. It's one of my favorite gaming series.
Metroid Prime is my favorite Metroid, I think, is all time.
Yeah. Metroid Prime. Metroid Prime is probably my favorite one, but all three of them are just A+. And I don't think they can just put out another Prime game in the same way they did back then. It has to be because the genre has evolved. I was thinking about this the other day. I was on a run last week and I was like, the last Prime game came out in 2007. It's 2018.
But
isn't that crazy? It's been 11 years since the Metroid game.
But you know that Metroid is not one of their top tiers that sell big, and that's why, like, if they do it, they're taking a chance every single time, and that's sad to hear that.
Right? No, it is. It's one of those franchises that's really, really big among fans, Nintendo fans, but not necessarily like a mainstream hit like you would with Zelda or Mario. Yeah, no, you're right. It's a bigger risk when they take that. But what I'm saying is, I think we're going to get a game that feels like a Metroid Prime. It's going to be a first-person exploration game that focuses on atmosphere and exploration, as I mentioned there. I think it's going to be the big boss fights, but at the same time, I'm interested to see what they do with it because the trilogy has a very established kind of formula also that worked phenomenally. And then while I think we're going to get a game that's very much in the same vein and a spiritual successor to those three with 4, I think there's going to be a lot of things that are probably different just because, one, they don't want to just make another one for the sake of making another one that feels exactly like the first 3. And 2, because Nintendo doesn't roll that way, which is why it's taken them so long. And then the other point is that just gaming's evolved in 11 years. It's changed a lot. There have been a lot of other first-person games that have done a lot of other things. So I'm very interested to see how they create something new, but that also feels familiar.
I feel the same way that I wish Sonic got the better treatment. I wish Sonic was something that they could have tried to look like. I wish Sonic was more successful in the 3D realm, but it's just not working. They're just not working for them. Yeah. And it's bad because the in-house is not doing a good job. And that's the sad part of it.
It's the sad thing when Sonic Team, when Sonic Team is not the ones putting out the A+ Sonic games.
It's sad to make me think that Nintendo can probably take Sonic and make it a better game.
Yes.
That's sad to hear.
Yeah.
But, like, it just saddens me. And then you have Sonic Mania that just comes out, and it's just bonkers. It's like, well, of course the 2D ones are going to be great. Right. Everybody loves it because of a bad taste of their mouth of a 3D Sonic every single time.
The sad thing about it is, I'll still stand by Sonic Adventure 1 and 2. Those were great, especially at the time.
I think Sonic Colors is the best one in the series.
Sonic Colors is great. Yeah,
I think it's the best one.
There are great 3D Sonic games out there, but they haven't been able to find. They never really gotten a good rhythm with the 3D Sonic games because it's really inconsistent. I would love a Sonic Adventure 3, like where it's in that style where you're like you got the hub world and you go to all the sub worlds, kind of like you would with the Mario 64. I think Sonic Adventure is one of my favorite Sonic games, and so. But for whatever reason, I don't know what it was. If it was it wasn't working for them, or they found it boring. I don't know. After Sonic Adventure 2, they totally ditched that and got way more experimental with it. And I don't think the experiments have all been extremely hit or miss.
And I feel like Castlevania is another series. I mean, I'm going by the list for my listeners that I mentioned. Is Castlevania should have been doing the Zelda treatment of Breath of the Wild. We should be getting this open world Castlevania style game now. Just give it this big haunting city or land and let us just run around and make our own story. Castlevania should be at that point right now. It's just not in the good hands of Konami right now with their.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, I'm actually. This is going to sound really sad, but I'm not convinced we're ever going to get another big.
No, the
Castlevania game.
No, the newest Castlevania they announced is on iOS, and that's it.
And it's a 2D.
Yeah.
I think Konami's going to successfully kill their properties and turn them into like smart. Yeah, I'm not very optimistic about any of the properties. I think Metal Gear Solid's going to die a slow, painful death. Yeah,
and that's another thing too. I think Metal Gear is going to kill it off, but I think that's a series that it cannot go back to the way it was. It has to. It has to stay in that open sandbox, do it your way kind of style. It makes sense.
And that's okay. So that's the other thing too. Like, and I would have loved to have seen what the full Metal Gear Solid 5 would have looked like, because that was one of my things that I missed in Metal Gear Solid 5. Was I loved Metal Gear Solid 4 so much, and Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes, the two I played, the one on the GameCube. Those games were amazing. I loved the compelling story, and whenever you stop being linear. Or as linear, it makes it harder to tell a tightly wove story.
Yes.
And while from a gameplay perspective, Metal Gear Solid 5 was incredible. I mean, absolutely incredible.
And that's the consequence of do-it-yourself kind of games. Is you're not going to give a deep story because it's more of you make the story. You do it the way you want. So you're not going to get this deep, complex story. I'm not saying it's impossible, but a lot of people want to do it their way, and they'll sacrifice a good horror story instead of that.
Well, I think it is possible. It's just very challenging.
It is.
And I'm sure it requires a lot more resources, because I think The Witcher 3 is a perfect example.
You know what? You're absolutely right. Witcher 3 is phenomenal.
It is how you have an open world where you can do things your way, but also there's still a story that's cohesive. It runs through.
But your character's got to talk. It's hard. I'll put it like that, because Zelda is hard to put a story sometimes when Zelda can't really talk. I'm not saying it's not impossible. They'll probably prove me wrong because they're good at that.
Right.
But it's hard because, like, when you have a character that doesn't really have a personality, or you have a character based on yourself and you can't really say the words you want to say, it's really hard to be immersed in that world. Right. You know what I mean? That's just me. But Rayman is a series to me that did go into a different direction, but is better going back to the 2D. And I'm not saying the 3D ones are not bad.
Right.
It's just 2D is where it belongs.
Right.
And so I don't know if you ever played the new Rayman Origins, and the other Rayman.
Right.
And so it's actually free.
The ones that go back to the 2D.
Right. And for listeners, it's free right now for your PS Plus and I'm saying this because it's going to be made by the time I post this, so it'll be free then.
Right.
But there's just a lot of games that break out of their trend, and some do well and some don't, and it's more of, do we keep trying to push it? Like, do we do the Sonic treatment, just keep going until we find that golden treasure part, or we just go straight back to a 2D one? And the next follow-up question is for you personally. You're playing God of War now. God of War is in this new direction that you are falling in love with.
Right.
Do you see it just staying like that now, or do you think it will go back into...
No, it won't go back. It will evolve, because here's the thing about God of War. God of War games are all pretty linear. This one, again, it's a lot more open. It's a lot more... Now, it's still more... I would say it's a lot more linear than, say, Breath of the Wild, for example. But, man, there are a bunch of side quests that I can just come and go and do whenever I want. That wasn't in the old God of War games. I mean, there were side quests, but it didn't work like that. Like, it was way more linear. Like, once you conquered this area, you moved on to the next area. That is not the case with the new God of War. There's like a main hub world, and there's like little areas you can branch off to. Again, more cohesive than a Breath of the Wild or a Metal Gear Solid 5. The story is fantastic. It's incredible. And the actual mechanics, I think, are still pretty similar to the old ones as far as like the combat goes. It still very much feels like a God of War, but it is open. You have choices you can make. You can go do things in different orders. You don't have to do it in a very strict, oh man, I got past this area, so darn, I'm sad I didn't do that side.
And you missed your opportunity, you can't go back.
Yeah, exactly. There's none of that. None of that so far.
Okay. So the next question is, would you like these games to continue on like that from here on out? Do you personally like to see Zelda continue the Breath of the Wild treatment? Do you want this open world, or would you like to see it go back and forth of a tradition in open world? And that's for your other games like God of War, Sonic, Metroid. Do you like these games to continue the way they are? You personally?
Yeah, no. Listen. Games have to change to survive. They become stale. Because again, God of War, the prequel, felt stale. It felt like we'd dried that well. We'd already taken all we could from that well. And so what did they do? They took a step back and said, "Hey, how can we make something different that resonates in a different way, but that still feels like God of War?" And they did it. And I think Zelda did the same thing. How do we convey that sense of exploration that people love about Zelda, without making it stop feeling like a Zelda game? Can we? And it's really brave. I'm really happy to see a lot of these big brands do that. Whenever it's like, oh gosh, we have a very strict formula that we've always abided by, and this is kind of what's defined the games. And for us to survive and to stop being to run the to avoid running the risk of becoming stale, they say we're gonna have to abandon the thing we know and coming up with something totally new. It's a big risk. It's paying off for these guys. I do want to see it keep going forward because, like anything, it needs to evolve or it gets stale, it gets old, and it gets boring.
But I'm in between that. Now, you're mentioning that God of War is doing the same. It's basically God of War, but they're changing a little formula. And I can see that with a lot of games doing that same treatment where, yes, you can still keep the tradition, but you could tweak it and put it in a different kind of view. God of War is still your hack and slash, destroy everything in the room before going to the next room, per se. I'm not saying this God of War will probably do that, but I'm pretty sure they have a lot of areas where
there's a lot of
you have to destroy everybody before going to the next area thing. Totally. But they're doing it from, let's get you more focused with these characters a little bit more on this journey. Let you feel what they go through instead of just, you're just this guy running around, right?
Right. And there's also still a lot more exploration involved because you're like, oh, I want to go over to this part of the map and see what's here versus like you just running through halls and killing stuff.
I can see that with Metro. I can see us now. Granted, Other M had a lot of bad taste in their mouth, and I blame that on the controls. I think if they revamp it in traditional controls and put it on the Switch, I think it'd be a phenomenal game.
The controls, I mean, that story is pretty bad.
Most Metroid games are pretty simple to me.
Yeah, but the story,
Other M to me, Other M, I think they had some issues. I'm not gonna say, but the gameplay and stuff is still freaking good to me. I really like the gameplay. I just think the remote idea was just a bad idea.
Right.
If you get traditional games, I think we can bypass the bad dialogue and all this other stuff because the gameplay. But I'm just saying more of Metroid could be more of let's get to know Samus a little bit more instead of I'm this, and we can do that with the God of War treatment that we're getting for this one, and we can get the same thing with Zelda. Well, Zelda's tough because Link is more of it's your Link, so you do it the way you want. Link Link to me never really had his own personality.
Yeah, I think
so.
I
it's
think
really
Wind
hard.
Waker was the only one that had much of a strong personality there. Yeah,
so that's really hard to do that. Sonic cannot do that. Sonic just needs to find itself. But
yeah, Sonic's on a spiritual journey right now.
But Castlevania can do that. Castlevania can be, let's focus more on our characters and take this closer to a journey. So there's a lot of games that do that. But for me personally, the way it is right now, I think it does need to continue. It does. I think we have to break out of that tradition, like you said. Even regardless, I disagree with it, but I think that we do need to continue it here on out.
Yeah. And again, I think the important thing about all these franchises is that it's not that you're abandoning your roots. It's figuring out again, going back to that core question, how can we create something new and fresh that still captures that same feeling that we all fell in love with these games. And I think they're doing a lot of these big IPs are in that transition right now, and I think they're killing it. And I want to see that continue moving forward. But I would also love to see them figure out, hey, what are some things that we when we made this change that we lost that we can reincorporate in a new way into our new type of game?
Yeah. Okay. So, but we are now going to be ending this program of the in-game boss. I want to thank everybody for coming in and listening, but that question still applies to y'all. Let me know how you feel. You can always email at me at ingameoffice@gmail.com. Just email me, and on Twitter, on Facebook too, you can message me and talk to me about and YouTube too. Talk to me about can these games go back to traditional style, and if they can, could they put a new spin on it, or do you see it? You know what? It needs to. I like this open world, do it myself, and I think that this is the new direction it should be going for a while. And we can evolve from there. And from the here on out, would you like these series to go here on out, or would you like to see, maybe a couple entries, and I would like them to kind of change form and maybe go back, kind of give us the nostalgia kind of feel. You let me know. And Caleb Masters, thank you so much for coming in to be a mini boss for me for the challenge.
It was a blast. Hope it was a good challenge.
So, but before we go, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me first and foremost. You can find me on Twitter, tweeting about. I tweet about video games quite a bit, and film. I am a film critic as well, so I talk all about movies. And that's on Twitter at CMastersTalk. Tweet at me about all your opinions. Right now, Avengers just came out, so by the time this post, I've got weird opinions about it. So maybe you want to talk about that. Hit me up. You can also find me on Instagram with the same handle, CMastersTalk. That's again letter C Masters Talk. And you can find me writing all the time and on the Cinematropolis.com or podcasting on the Cinematropolis. The Cinematropolis podcast, the Cinematic Schematic. Like our pages, subscribe to our podcast, all that good stuff.
And you can find me on Twitter and on Twitch as RetroAmp07. I'll be starting to play nostalgia video games only on the Twitch, from Nintendo to Dreamcast, just going through a bunch of library games that people probably didn't even know exist. You see a lot of games, people playing more the same games, but I want to bring a new twist into it, bring some new stuff on there. And Twitter, RetroAmp07, definitely reach me out there. And this is our in-game boss. Hi, and thank you so much for taking time to listen to the show that is part of the In-Game Boss program. Remember, you can always visit us on Facebook and Twitter to get the up-to-date news about what shows are premiering and whatnot. And also, you can always listen to our shows on iTunes, Podbean, and YouTube. And remember to follow and subscribe, leave a review and a 5-star rating to keep us going. And thank you so much.